Football is a working class game where anyone can beat anyone on their day, and it's that makes it incredible. It's that's made it the global force that it is today. Like a few years ago, Leicester City, Pete, have you heard of Leicester City?
Not that one.
No, right? So many of you would never have heard of Leicester City. A few years ago, Leicester City won the league. They won the Premier League. Right? It was the most incredible thing to witness. It gave every fan hope, everyone. They have as many Premier League titles as Liverpool. They have one more than Tottenham, and they're not invited into this rich boys clique because the wealthy teams, they got together to try to stop that achievement ever happening again, and that isn't sport. And if this happens, and unfortunately I really do think it will, I don't want to be over dramatic, but I do think it's the end of the sport that we loved. It truly is. Like I think it's going to happen, and I don't think there's anything we can do about it. But what we can do, and I hope as fans, that we will remember the names of these owners, the owners of these teams that made this decision, how they hid behind a devastating pandemic as a reason to announce this while a season's being played. They didn't consult a single player, not a single manager. They certainly didn't consult the fans of their teams. They bought into a sport that so many of us live for. At 3 p.m. on a Saturday, they took it and they are going to crush it without ever thinking of the damage that's being done. Don't forget the people who did this. It's them. It's those owners. In a decade's time, when the Super League's thriving and, you know, I'm sure it's great and great goals and all those things, and these owners will think that it's all water under the bridge. Don't ever forget that it was them, those owners. They took something so pure and so beautiful, and they beat the love and the joy out of it, and they did it for money. They just did it for money, and it's disgusting. And I know you don't care, but I do. We'll be right back on more of the Late Late Show.
Welcome to Good Seats Still Available, a curious little podcast devoted to exploring what used to be in professional sports. Here's your host, Tim Hanlon.
All right, gang, let's get to the festivity, shall we? It's Tim Hanlon, your pal, your chief officer of defunctness, previously domiciled, relocation, contraction, all kinds of forgotten sports hijinks. It's Good Seats Still Available. Yes, the curious little podcast that is devoted to what used to be in professional sports. Thanks for coming by. And as longtime listeners of this show will know, certainly we go way, way back into all kinds of sports history with various leagues and teams that, for whatever reasons, are no longer with us, major league sporting events of sorts. You name it, we kind of get into all those things. And that doesn't mean, though, we don't get into things that are more timely, shall we say. We love to make the argument that everything old is new again. There's always the rediscoveries of these teams and leagues, or a revisiting, or a broaching, I guess, of ills or mistakes made around ownership or assumptions around sports and all that kind of stuff, right? It just seems to be always more being made around this topic that we've stumbled across for ourselves. And frankly, look no further than last week. We try to get this episode hot and fresh and ready for you as quickly as we can in this little podcast schedule that we've created for ourselves. And of course, it is the Super League. That's James Corden. If you've never watched the Late Late Show on CBS, it's great. I think, frankly, most people don't watch James and his hijinks live very much anymore. And I think, frankly, that applies to just about every late show that's on late night TV these days. But like a lot of others, we discovered that clip on YouTube a couple of days, or frankly, hours after he gave it. And that's only a portion of his longer, I don't even call it a tirade, but because he's a comedian, he's a great entertainer. But find it on YouTube or wherever else you find video clips and stuff, because it's really impassioned. And I think, as a British citizen, James Corden comes across as being very honest and emotional about what transpired nary a week and a half ago. It was as things was announced, I think, in earnest on Monday, April 19th. And as we record this, that's not only maybe a week and a half ago, and we dropped this about 2 weeks ago now. Some rumors of it had been leaking out a few days beforehand, and certainly I think most people, most observers of the sport globally, or in Europe, or hell, even domestically here, would not have been surprised, or were kind of anticipating something along these lines for some time. But the fact that it was actually announced, the speed at which it was announced, the timing of it, in the face of UEFA rejiggering its Champions League structure yet again, to accommodate these sort of clamoring forces of dollars seeking to make more of them. But just frankly, the sheer amount of volume and speed of the pushback against it, because literally within a couple of days, the tsunami of negative feelings about this Super League just literally engulfed this thing within a matter of days, 72 hours maybe. And by the end of the week, the 22nd, the 23rd, you had folks like J.P. Morgan who were putting up the dollars to sort of bankroll this thing. You had mea culpas from all of the Premier League participants. You had all kinds of condemnation. That's the word. Condemnation. Come on, I haven't said either of those words in a long time, so I'm sorry I screwed them up. Sorry. But you know what I mean. I mean, from all corners of the soccer world, the sporting community writ large, fans, of course, in particular, just in all circles, almost uniform in its just disdain for the very notion of this concept, let alone its execution. Now, our conversation this week is with our pal Ian Plenderleith, who you may remember from our great episode number 49 a couple of years back. He writing the great book called Rock and Roll Soccer, the story of the North American Soccer League. And Ian is a columnist for Soccer America and a lot of other soccer publications out there. So who better to kind of weigh in into kind of an overview of sort of what the hell's going on with this thing. Sadly, a bit of an understanding that this may not be sort of the last attempt to do this kind of stuff, but frankly, a little bit of a conversation of how we got here. We know how big money has been sort of pushing on the sport of soccer. We certainly know about the globalization of the sport for all its goodness, certainly a lot of not goodness. When it comes to just the decision-making around money, foreign investment in things like the Premier League, U.S. owners and their interpretations, frankly, or their how they grow up in a sporting domain that is very much centrally controlled and is about spreadsheets and big business, increasingly private equity and those kinds of things, right? And what happens when you shake all those things up? Not all of it's good, right? The idea of global branding and churning out jerseys and bigger subscription fees to watch these games, these world tours featuring exhibitions that aren't really competitions at all. The greed, frankly, that creeps into it. These are people like, the Glazer family and the John Henrys of the world and, the Manchester Cities and having teams in MLS and in the Australian League as a sort of a global platform, if you will, in addition to Man City in the Premier League. We can debate all of these things and whether they're good or not so good. But look, all of that stuff and more, as we get into our conversation with Ian in just a few minutes, really kind of sets the stage for why this is even an idea and a concept and even something that's on the drawing board with money behind it. Some will argue it's too late. This is just inevitable. Maybe, and frankly, hopefully it's not. The uniqueness of domestic leagues and the countries in which they compete, the pristineness, I guess, of competition, whereas James kind of hints, anybody can beat anybody on a given day, cup competitions and all that kind of stuff. So we're going to get into a very first hot take on this. I don't think it would come as a surprise for me to sort of share this. It's ridiculous or sad, very sad. There you go. Super League, its quick rise and quicker demise, and perhaps maybe what is to come from this idea. And I think, sadly, it's probably not an idea that will go away quietly. But let's get into all of that stuff. Our first hot take, and we do reserve the right to do that kind of stuff, even though the story is still playing out. As we get into our quick and early discussion on this European Super League. And again, the teams we're talking about: Arsenal, Chelsea, Liverpool, Man City, Man United, Tottenham Hotspur in the English Premier League, AC Milan, Inter Milan, and Juventus in Serie A in Italy, and 3 Spanish clubs: Atlético Madrid, Barcelona, and Real Madrid. Some of those teams, not the Premier League ones, but some of those clubs are still, as we record this and drop this, are still technically part of this league and have not renounced their membership. So this is a story that's going to play out for a longer period of time. But does it qualify for our little our corner of obsession? Yeah, it's a league that literally came and went in less than a week's time, and we get into that with our pal Ian Plenderleith. And he, the international correspondent for Soccer America, and the author of the great book Rock and Roll Soccer: The Story of the NASL, coming up in a few moments' time. You will enjoy it, and it is the beginning of probably multiple conversations around this topic. First, a promotional note. We always like to feature one of our great sponsors, especially one of those who has merch to consider in specifically our realm of goodness, that of forgotten sports and teams and leagues and stuff. And you hear me tout these guys often, and there's a reason why I do. And they're Streaker Sports, the purveyors of sports culture. That's their nickname, streakersports.com. And the promo code is Good Seats. That's one word, Good Seats, for 15% off all of your purchases. As you know, they all kinds of great sports culture stuff. The Caddyshack collection, the Bill Raftery Onions collection, all kinds of wonderful assemblages, curations of stuff, and new arrivals all the time, including things like the National Lacrosse League. That's something our pal Steve Holroyd and I have talked about for some time, and Dave Coleman. We've talked about a sort of lacrosse history. We're talking about the National Lacrosse League, not the current one that plays indoors, but the original one from 1974 and 75. You'll find all the teams from that there. There's a new CBA, Continental Basketball Association collection. Lord knows a couple of episodes devoted to that in previous episodes. But of course, true to this, and all kinds of other leagues and stuff, but true to this week's episode, as we get into not only the current situation of pro soccer, but some of the foundational tributaries, the North American Soccer League makes an appearance in this conversation. As you can imagine, the Cosmos maybe being a template or an avatar for sort of this global super brand. I just saw a couple of comments on social media this last week where some folks living in Japan and some other places, they posted some old Cosmos articles from some tours that the Cosmos did back in the 70s. And he says that he still gets inquiries from his Japanese friends about the Cosmos. It's still a brand that people remember and it resonates. But the NASL collection at streakersports.com is awesome. There's every shirt there under the sun, just about. I think with the exception of the Cosmos, which is its own separate logo issue. But every other team that you can imagine or remember, and a couple of different sort of flavors of those, because there are lots of different logos for some of those teams as they sort of came and went in that league. They're all there. Everybody from the San Diego Sockers to the Le Manique de Montreal to the Calgary Boomers to the St. Louis Stars and everything in between. They're all there. And they're the sheets? No, the shirts. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. The shirts are lovingly crafted, and they're really well made, and they're excellent. And why pay bust that retail when you don't have to? Use that promo code Good Seats, one word, Good Seats, at streakersports.com, And, for those shirts or anything else, for God's sakes, go for it. Thank you, Streaker Sports, for your sponsorship. Thanks for you all in listener land for trying them out. Please do try, because we get a couple of shekels of love. We could always use your support financially to keep our lights going. And, it's not free to make this stuff, frankly. And thanks again to all involved. And thank you for continuing to listen. Let's get into our conversation as we do a quick, early, first hot take on the European Super League, the ill-fated Super League. Thank goodness. With our pal Ian Plenderleith, here's our conversation we had just a couple of days ago. Please, as always, sit back and enjoy. I guess maybe we should kind of sort of start at the pre-beginning, because this situation of this Super League kind of, it has been rumored for probably years if you've been paying attention, but the seeds of it, right, have been sown and sprouting for quite some time. And maybe we can kind of just roll around in that sort of dusty, soil and seeds to kind of maybe set the tone for maybe what the hell had just happened this week.
Yeah, the Super League has been kind of soccer's mythical beast since sometimes in the 1980s, I think it was, first of all, mooted. And then towards the end of the 1980s, the big clubs started to use it in order to blackmail FIFA, basically, to reform the Champions League, what was known then as the European Cup or the European Champions Cup. They wanted to reform it in order to tilt the balance in their favor. What we saw last week was a league which wanted to safeguard against any possible failure by abolishing relegation. What the clubs originally wanted when they reformed the European Champions Cup was a competition where they were guaranteed a certain number of games and where they would not be eliminated in September in the first round of a knockout cup competition. And on one level, it was entirely understandable. I think Franz Beckenbauer was a big one who complained when Bayern Munich, where he was president at the time, were knocked out of the UEFA Cup in the first round, and complained, well, now we have like a whole season on Wednesday nights where we could be filling our stadium, where we simply don't have anybody to play against. So from a commercial point of view, it was a bit of an inevitability that the clubs were going to get their way in reforming European competition. What that, of course, eliminated was the possibility of failure. For other fans, of course, especially in Germany, it was absolutely fantastic when Bayern Munich got eliminated from the first round of the UEFA Cup by some team, maybe from Bulgaria or somewhere like that. And I think that the likes of Bayern Munich and AC Milan, I think they were knocked out of the Champions Cup by Trondheim of Norway at some point. They did not want to countenance this possibility. So they strong-armed UEFA with this whole threat to form their own league. And UEFA reformed what were very good and exciting cup competitions into these drawn-out group stage leagues that we now have. And that also included, though, I'm guessing, if I'm not mistaken, if I remember it correctly, is also sort of guaranteed slots for certain leagues, right, based on their relative or perceived strength and or dominance overall in international competition stuff, right? Yeah. It was done gradually over the course of a few seasons. First of all, it was just the champions. Then it was the champions and second place team. So people said, well, how can you call it the Champions League if there are non-champions in it? But then, of course, champions just became a name to brand it by, and people kind of forgot about that criticism. And yes, and then gradually there were more and more slots for the leagues, Italy, England, Spain, Germany mainly. And that's been the case ever since, of course. And it's extremely hard now for any teams from a lot of the struggling nations, I guess we'd call them the second-tier nations, Scotland, Switzerland, Poland, those kind of places. They will get a team occasionally into the group stages, but then they tend to get eliminated. The whole competition now is basically to eliminate as many of the small teams as possible so that the same 16 or so big clubs can compete the final 16. You kind of wonder why. You could kind of understand in a way why the Super League was formed, because they just wanted to dispense with all these games and get rid of the pretense that they really care about soccer in other nations, when really they just want to play against themselves and maximize their revenue.
So this separation was really, for those paying attention, right? And that's probably more of the sort of a harder core soccer fan, but the separation was really kind of underway, and probably money and prestige and all those kinds of things sort of underneath it, but perhaps maybe more muted than what we've sort of seen spill out in the open in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, absolutely, Tim. When you compare the protests we've seen in the last week compared with the dissent against the reform of the Champions League 25 odd years ago, it's completely different. That time, it kind of caught people unawares. It was presented, reforms as to make the competition more exciting. It was apparent, of course, that the big clubs wanted to make more money out of it, and there was more money in it for them from TV rights. And of course, if the further you progressed in the competition, the more money you made. You made money from points in the group stage and so forth. But in terms of people protesting about at the time, it was mainly down to the sort of left field press and, I guess, fans of smaller teams chanted about it. The football associations of the smaller nations went along with it. I mean, maybe they thought they didn't have any chance of defeating this amendment. Maybe they thought that they had a chance of getting in with a slice of the pie. Now, I wrote a piece for the magazine When Saturday Comes in 1997, pointing out, as one or two other people did at the time, the dangers of this reform of the Champions Cup, which was obviously going to create two-tier soccer, two tiers of wealth in soccer in Europe. And at that time, I was living in Zurich in Switzerland, and that season had qualified for the group stage of the Champions League. And they put their prices up for tickets by seven. They increased the price of a normal ticket by sevenfold. And so it was very expensive to watch this game. They played against Ajax Amsterdam, Rangers of Scotland, and I'm blanking on the third team, but I think it's Auxerre of France. And they won their first three games in the group stage. The whole nation was like, great, look at this Champions League, we can compete. They then lost their second three games and were actually eliminated. But for them, for Grasshopper Zurich at the time, who are now in the Swiss second division, at the time they thought, if we can win our domestic league every year, we can compete in the Champions League every year, then we're guaranteed a certain amount of money and we'll be one of the big boys. But it became very difficult for teams in the second-tier nations to compete, as you see now. I mean, when did a team from Switzerland last make the quarterfinals, for example? So I'm rambling on a bit here. But basically, it was a stitch-up at the time, and it was kind of passed through on the sly. And the kind of negative media reaction we had to the European Super League this week, negative reaction from media, negative reaction from players, coaches, administrators, politicians, and of course, absolutely crucial in this, with the reaction of the fans. We did nothing. You didn't see anything like that back in the late 1980s or the early 1990s when the Champions League was first birthed.
But that separation, though, was also creeping into the domestic leagues as well, right? You had sort of the rich getting richer, so to speak, and it also begat a, sort of an attractive investment thesis that, sort of led to, let's call it foreign investment and or sort of super team kind of dynamics that perversely affected these leagues as well, right? It wasn't just at the sort of European league level, right? You had you see it for years and years and years where the Bayerns of the world would routinely win or come in second place in the Bundesliga, and perversely you have clearly everybody else, right, trying to get the crumbs and whatever else is available, but also it's when Bayern comes to town, even if you were the lowliest qualifier, or you just moved up to the top tier that year, right? That's a boon, if you will, for at least 2 games a season because you get to play the big guys. So I guess what I'm trying to get in there is a question there is, beyond sort of the European continental level, what's going on over the last number of years in the domestic league situation? Because it seems to me that that sort of separation is sort of literally bubbling up and or trickling down, shall we say, to the individual countries and their domestic leagues too.
Well, that was a direct knock-on effect of the Champions League, that the teams that competed in the Champions League made way more cash than the teams that were not competing in Europe in the domestic level. Obviously, that allowed them to buy better players, to pay them more wages, and that led to, as well as two tiers across European soccer, the two tiers also in domestic soccer. So you got, as you say, Bayern Munich's a very good example. They're about to win their 9th successive title in Germany. You have the domination of Juventus and the Milan clubs in Italy, Barcelona and the two Madrid clubs in Spain, and then you can. In England, you can point to four or five big teams, which are, of course, the usual suspects that broke off to briefly join the European Super League last week for 2 very funny days. That was also at the time, that was obvious that was going to happen. And the team I just cited you, Grasshopper Zurich, was also going to happen at the second level. Actually ended up in Switzerland, happening with FC Basel, who won their league, I think something like 8 or 9 seasons in a row, and were rich on Champions League cash because they were able to make the group phase a few times as well. And it's had a really damaging effect on just in terms of the attractiveness of the competition. In the 70s, when I grew up in England, Liverpool were the dominant team. They were a great team. They played great soccer. They won the European Champions Cup. But there were several seasons when they didn't win. And you had teams like Everton, Aston Villa, Nottingham Forest, Derby County. You even had teams like Queen's Park Rangers and West Ham United, Southampton, challenging for the English title. And that was much more interesting now when you get the occasional outlier like Leicester City, who even themselves were backed with large amounts of foreign cash. Once in a generation, a team like that may win the Premier League. But it's getting harder and harder. In Germany, nobody is coming close to competing with Bayern Munich. So it's a little bit depressing. The lack of just the lack of variety in seeing who wins a trophy at the end of the season. In Germany, there's a lot of talk about, well, there are kids now at 10 years old. All their life, they've lived with Bayern Munich as champions. And how does that make the Bundesliga interesting to them? And it's a very good question. And it's like the clubs are aware of this. Everybody's aware of this, but nobody wants to take any action to do anything about it, other than going off this strange cliff edge, as we saw last week, of breaking off to form this revolutionary but very fleeting league. And I think something we can talk about today is how to take those reforms back in the other direction in order to, and I think that's been one of the great things about this Super League is that it's prompted a fantastic discussion in the last week. We're talking about things we should have been talking about 30 years ago, and we should have been talking about over the course of the last 30 years, but it has been a very low-level discourse on the need to redistribute wealth in soccer, to stop a handful of giant clubs dominating, to stop this tedious repetition of winners and the same competition year after year after year. So I think that what is very exciting now about the Super League is, ironically, it's almost it was not only the arbiter, not only the harbinger of its own destruction. It will hopefully be the harbinger of a more constructive and positive and more positive outlook for the future of soccer, with hopefully some common sense and some imagination put into it.
Well, look, the proverbial money is the root of all evil, right, applies. That maxim is certainly front and center in all this. However, it does kind of cut both ways. And maybe, it's interesting because you kind of hinted at it, right? The occasional Watford or Queen's Park Rangers, right? You look at those stories, whether it's an Elton John or whoever else, right, decides, at least, domestically, and now over the last dozen or so years, international outsider money. That's sort of become the, I guess, modern formula, right? Take second division club, perhaps with some halo of past glory, invest or take over ownership, pay a ton of money for top talent, fight like hell, and get promoted, and allow, in the case of the UK, right, or the case of Britain, the Premier League riches to follow at least for a year or two, and then we'll see what happens, right? Once you're in the mix, and you'll see if you keep up. But I guess the question in there is, it does cut both ways, right? Fans get energized, right? Because, hey, here's an owner who's going to commit and spend money and be competitive and get the team up, and we're going to be competitive, and we're going to try to win it all. Yet, I guess there is a price to pay, if you will, literally and figuratively, when that money comes from various sources, maybe not sort of traditional, maybe international, maybe somewhat cynically as more of a true hardcore business proposition than it is anything to do with the love of football or that. It's about branding and all that kind of stuff, right? So I guess the question, sort of the last question of the prelude part of our conversation is fans, the reaction we've seen the last couple of weeks, and especially this week with the Super League thing, it almost sounds, to the sort of devil's advocate, a bit of hypocrisy, right? Because some of these fans have been very welcoming of the attention. The Rocco Comicios of the world coming into Italy and Serie A. And there just seems to be no shortage of folks. And there's a warm embrace because, hey, people are going to pay attention to this club and put money against it. However, it's also the undermining that seems to have blown up now that this Super League has sort of come and maybe gone.
Yeah, fans, it's been a big wake-up call for a lot of fans. You can definitely see that. And that's been very refreshing. But as you point out, it is also slightly comical to see fans of, say, Chelsea, Manchester City, all of a sudden realizing what their clubs have been doing to soccer for the last 25 years and how they've got fat on the current system. And really, these clubs are just taking the current system to its logical conclusion, as I kind of mentioned before. The European Super League is really just a logical next step from the Champions League. It's a further insurance policy against failure, and a further attempt to increase the global reach and to increase revenues. So it's a very good point you make. Yeah, but better late than never. And if supporters realize now what it is that's been happening to the game as a whole the last couple of decades, then I can only see that broadly as a good thing, even if we can also agree that there's a slightly comical aspect to the sudden turning on the big owners of fans who've been happy to sit in those seats for the last 10, 20 years and cheer on their team in the Champions League.
All right, so what do you? Let's segue into the events of the last week or so, and frankly, still playing out. We're recording this on the weekend of the 24th, 25th of April. This is still literally not even a week old from its, if you will, announcement to seeming just demolition. Although there is absolutely things that are still alive, and I'm sure lots more still to play out, both short term and long term. But what was, I guess, in your deconstruction of the last week or so, like what went wrong here? Because as we just established, a lot of these dynamics were already underway. I mean, the Glazers and Manchester United. I mean, these are not new stories in the United family story, right?
Yeah.
And all of us, it seems to the outsider, right? All of a sudden, there's just sort of this wellspring of, a desire for a reversion back to the quote unquote good old days, right? But as we kind of established before, there's big money now in sports and television and all that kind of stuff. And these things were, frankly, well underway. Why the sort of sudden, dramatic, and frankly, seemingly universal and abrupt, just negative reaction to this? Because it would seem, to your point earlier, this was a kind of a natural kind of conclusion or next step in this ever corporatization of the beautiful game.
Yeah. Well, there's several reasons why it failed. One, a complete lack of imagination on the part of the club owners to think outside their own narrow world, which is sort of shaped by banal numbers and the business graphs and that kind of thing. And this is what you happen, I think, when you have people in an out-of-touch, wealthy money world, when they have to suddenly interact with the rest of the world. It highlights how out of touch they are and how never in touch they have been. So what you have to ask here is, like, how did they have such lack of foresight? Well, who were the public relations people that were advising them, or their marketing executives? If you're about to revolutionize soccer, how can you come up with a plan that's just so like a deadbeat, if you like, a closed league for big clubs? I mean, was that really the how did they think they were gonna sell that to the rest of the world? Second reason why I think they failed was because they just like incredibly poor planning on their part. I mean, you have to wonder if they did much research before they went ahead with this, or were they just so emboldened by what they thought were their own brilliant visions that they just plowed on regardless. For example, how did they think that Paris Saint-Germain were going to react? I mean, that's a club that's owned by people who own a station in the Middle East, which has owns the broadcasting rights to the current Champions League for the next 4 or 5 years. In Germany, did they not think it was possible that Bayern and Dortmund were going to have difficulty getting this past the business structures, the fan-owned, fan-run clubs? So I don't know. The whole thing kind of came out of nowhere. The timing was absolutely bizarre, right in the middle, just as the UEFA were about to pass more Champions League reforms, which are only there because these same clubs have threatened to go and leave and form a Super League again and again and again. And once the Super League was announced, the lack of Dortmund and Bayern and Paris Saint-Germain was already a very telling sign. I thought it would last maybe a week. In fact, that it lasted 2 days was even more incredible. The mass dissent, the reaction to this breakaway was just astonishing. As you point out, there was negative coverage from everywhere, from the media, from the players, from the coaches, from administrators. Everybody had. I mean, the players, I think, and the players like the Liverpool players who spoke out, and Jurgen Klopp, I think they were blindsided, but they were definitely miffed that they had not been told about this. But at the second time, they also are soccer people, and they recognize a terrible idea when they see one, so they were out against it instinctively. I think the smartest people were definitely Bayern and Dortmund, who waited to. I mean, everybody's talking about what a great principled stand they made. I don't think they were doing that at all. I think they were just waiting to see what the reaction was. And I think they were probably extremely wise to do that. I think they were the smartest players in this whole thing, because I think they maybe intuited what the reaction would certainly be in Germany among their own fans. And they were probably very relieved when they saw that was a reaction among fans across Europe and probably the whole world. And that's why they were smart enough to stick it out and not throw their lot in, even though there was 2 slots there sitting waiting for them. So yeah, that's broadly speaking, I think that's why it failed. I mean, when I talk about a lack of imagination, for me, European competition, soccer competition, the Champions League especially, have become so predictable that they're just not interesting anymore. And the group stage is a particularly drawn-out, tedious stage, and the fact that UEFA have now decided to extend that league stage up to 10 games plus playoffs is just extraordinary. Michel Platini, the much maligned Platini, disgraced UEFA official, did once have a fantastic idea of just making one big European knockout competition with 256 clubs from around Europe. And I think, well, okay, that's an idea you can discuss. It's probably not an idea that's going to get past at this current time in soccer history. But that's the kind of thing where I think there's a great idea to talk about. Like, why not bring back that sense of adventure into cup competition where there's danger, where you have to win to actually succeed and get on? You don't have this get-out clause. Well, if you lose a couple of group games, then you still might get through to the next, progress through to the next round. For me, that's a cup competition is where there's a risk to the big teams, where you can go to somewhere in Latvia or Bulgaria or to Scotland even and have a chance of your the big name losing that one season. So I find it very funny that these clubs are always marketing themselves as this massive global brands, and we're so great and we do this and that, but they're scared of playing against Wisła Krakow in cup competition in case they accidentally lose. So,
but that at the heart of that, though, right, is, and this is sort of the biggest sort of part of source of tension, I think, right, is, in the world of major investment, private equity, et cetera, right? The game is less about sort of the outsized gains and expectations. It's really, at least in the short term, it's about mitigating risk, frankly, eliminating it, right? That's the most of the effort before a big investment occurs is around risk evaluation and trying to come up with scenarios where risk is either minimized or essentially guaranteed not to sort of rear its ugly head. Now, given that, and given the influx of money and the corporatization, frankly, by the way, not just of soccer, but also sports generally worldwide. It's another issue we could talk about. But that when you talk about that and juxtapose that with what you just described, which is much more noble, much more organic, much more originalist, right, about the sport, right? That's the competition and the spirit and all the alliances that come with that and fandom and all that stuff, which is pure and great and beautiful, right? The problem is that in the world of sports being big and bigger business, right, this is really sort of the issue that you got to throw out on the table is what you just described, that sort of upset, that sort of more competitive balance, that sort of, anything can happen kind of thing, is the absolute antithesis of what investors want to hear. Discuss.
That's true. That's
right?
The problem when
what happens now, right?
That's the problem when you turn sport into business, and it's the big contradiction. Yeah, as you say, if you're a business, you want to minimize risk. If you're a sports fan, the whole point is the risk, the idea of you go to a game and you don't know what's going to happen. We still experience it if you're watching teams like I do, Lincoln City in the English Third Division or Eintracht Frankfurt in the Bundesliga. You experience that risk the whole 90 minutes. You're terrified and almost certain that the opponent is going to score a goal every time they get the ball. For fans of Bayern Munich, Manchester City, I presume that watching a game is an entirely different experience. You're more or less just waiting for them to score and beat up on the opponent and then lift the trophy. I really don't see the point of following a team like that at all. I think we have to start rowing back against that idea of sport purely as a business, and as it was in Europe for the best part of 100 years. Certainly, the way sports teams were run was very poor, and there are much better ways to run a sports business than to just say, well, I'm only in it for the soccer and get out there and try and win. Of course, there has to be a financial plan. I'm definitely not disputing that for a second. What we have to do, though, is see how that plan works across the game, not just for those teams at the top. It sounds such an obvious point, and I feel bored with myself for making it for the last 30 years or so. But without it, the inevitability is more wealth at the top. Doesn't mean the games are any better. It doesn't mean the sport's any better. It just means usually you're pouring in money at the top of the game, which is going straight to agents and to players and enriching them fabulously. But that does not help the game. It puts the top clubs into debt. It puts the bottom clubs into danger of going bankrupt. And that's something we're seeing more and more. You pointed out to me in an email of Bordeaux in the French League filing for bankruptcy. The French League, of course, lost their TV deal late last year, I think it was, when the Spanish company Media Pro went out of business. And when you're playing with these high amounts of money, when you have the expectation of that high amount of money, and this is something we can talk about all the way back to the North American Soccer League, you're making a big risk if one of your backers, be it a huge oil company, be it a foreign government, be it a extremely wealthy businessman, if their business suddenly goes down the pan, or if they suddenly lose interest, then your club and sometimes your league is left sitting high and dry and without any cash. And that's because there is no long-term financial planning in most of the European leagues. Unlike you see it in the German, everybody's been talking about the German 50+1 rule this week, which is also very amusing because for a long time Germany has been talking about abolishing it. Now it's been looked at as the ideal way to go forward for the rest of the game.
Well, for our audience, so why don't you explain what that 50+1 idea is, because it seems to have taken some new life given the sort of what's happened during the course of the week. It's probably new to a lot of people, but in a nutshell, you want to explain what 50+1 is?
Yes, it basically means that no individual or any particular company can take over a German soccer club. The maximum number of shares they can own is 49%. So the 51% of the voting rights within a club always stay with the fans or with the club itself, so to speak.
And that can be publicly floated or privately held, but the idea is to keep the majority ownership, essentially significant minority ownership versus
the club. Yeah, exactly. And it's they've been talking about the ironic thing is in Germany the discussion has been over the last 2 years to try and abolish 50+1 because they say we can't compete with the Premier League unless we have more outside investors. And our teams are not competing well enough in Europe and in the Champions League because the Premier League has so much money. Fortunately, so far, it's held out. There's another contradiction in that there are some clubs who get around the rule because they were grandfathered into it, like Bayer Leverkusen, owned by Bayer, and VfL Wolfsburg, owned by Volkswagen, who have been owned by those companies ever since they were founded almost over 100 years ago. So they were grandfathered in. Red Bull have got around it in Leipzig, and Hoffenheim, also owned by a computer entrepreneur who put a lot of money into the club. So it's a little bit strange. I mean, it is a great rule, but it's inconsistently applied for various historical reasons. Still, it's been heartening to see in the British press this week, for example, how much that has been discussed, to see politicians finally calling for a root and branch review of the way soccer is run in England. And you probably know there are several clubs have gone to the wall in England over the last few years, usually unscrupulous owners coming in, taking over the club, promising big things, and then next thing you know, they've sold off the stadium to a supermarket, and the club's left with debts and without a home. And so that's 50+1 explained, and it is a good rule, and and as I say, I'm glad Germany has not dumped it, and it will be interesting to see if it has its time in the coming months, or if the European Super League goes back, brushes itself off, sews up its wounds, and comes back and tries to make another attempt.
Does a UEFA or even a FIFA have a role to play in this in terms of maybe, I don't know, harmonizing that kind of sort of rule structure? Because you hinted at the Premier League, right, in some respects is given people a model to kind of emulate and or try to upstage, right, because of all the money in the outside, right? But that imbalance, right, is now polluting, if you will, some of these other leagues in sort of the same model. And if that's just a hastening of demise, right, I guess the question is, how do you harmonize these domestic leagues, at least structurally, for an idea like that? Or is that kind of a fool's errand, given that, domestic leagues are domestic leagues?
Yeah, these are going to be huge questions in the coming months and years. UEFA did try with the financial fair play, and they were not able to really assert themselves on that, and they applied it inconsistently. They got into trouble with the law in the case of Manchester City, who managed to get their verdict overturned. So I think they need to sit back down again, all the FAs together, and start discussing constructive, meaningful ways that we can move the game in a direction where it benefits all countries, all clubs in all countries. Where people are talking a lot this week about soccer and the cultural heritage, and that's a kind of cliche, but it's also very important, the way that thousands of clubs in countries like Germany and England provide a very important part of the social fabric. And here in Frankfurt, for example, I think there are around 70 or 80 soccer clubs alone, and that's not a huge city. It's a city of 700,000 people. So, and you get it's a fantastic way for me as a referee to find out about the social fabric of this city. And it's been crushing to have all the games cancelled over the last 6 months, and it kind of takes the heart out of the heartbeat out of the daily life of the city in many ways, because the soccer clubs are such a crucial part of the social network of the city, and they're staffed almost exclusively by hardworking volunteers who love the game and who are at the much quoted grassroots of football, and who, to me, are just if not way more important than a club like Bayern Munich. So when UEFA and the German FA sits down and looks at the last week's event and think, why has this happened and why were so many people against it, they have to think about every single one of these tiny clubs, all the way down to the village out in the sticks, and how this gets people out of their houses, how it gets young people out training and keeping fit, getting to know each other, getting to know people from different backgrounds, playing against teams from different backgrounds. And I think that if we don't have some kind of proper overview of that, then we can forget it and say, okay, next time they come back with their European Super League, let them do it if that's the best we can do. But I think we can do much better than that.
Well, look, some of those folks would also say that some of those ideas smack of, again, playing devil's advocate, right? So where I sort of sit on this, it smacks of collectivism or socialism or
absolutely,
right?
absolutely.
And now we're into another realm of dissension within the sport, right? And uniquely, I think, and sitting here in the States, right? 25 years of Major League Soccer, right, which is a closed, franchise-based and very similar to all the other major sports in the United States, right? That model in the U.S. has been always closed, right? There hasn't been promotion and relegation in any of the sports, let alone soccer. And again, this smacks to the investor as an anachronism to why they would get involved, right? Because any of these great lurches forward in terms of new stadiums and all the investment stuff in the league has been because you're basically buying a franchise in a system that is effectively guaranteed not to lose value per se, because there's no risk of a team going down or a team, sort of falling on hard times, because, and arguably, I don't want to sort of pick on MLS. I mean, the competitiveness has been relatively even, right? It's truly on any given day. But I would say as an American soccer fan for a long time, it's not like we're killing it on the World Cup stage, right? All the sort of benefits that we're supposed to be getting, the business part of this of the sport, the way it's set up here, is still a business, and it hasn't necessarily become. I mean, it's an amazing feat in this country over 25 years and then some for a league and all these great stadiums and stuff. But it's not sort of perfect nirvana either, competitively or otherwise, right? We never win, even in our Champions Cup in North and Central America, right? CONCACAF. It's still, it's still a plodding kind of thing. I guess the question in there is, does collectivism, socialism, charged words for sure, a closed league structure that arguably nurtures and supports and roots, right? I'm a big believer that MLS my understanding was MLS needed to go that route in the 90s to get this thing finally rooted in this country, this sport, after years and years and NASL, et cetera. But now it's 25 years on and it still hasn't let up on those leashes. There's no movement yet to kind of allow more fluidity, more polyglot ownership structures, the idea of relegation and promotion. It's still very much a closed system, and that still rankles most of the Euro snobs here in the country.
On the other hand, the league still exists and is steady. Compare it with the North American Soccer League, as I often do, and you have to say, well, built up from a starting point of 10 or 12 teams, or was it even 8 teams in the first season of MLS, and has steadily and sensibly expanded. Now, I don't think MLS is beyond criticism. I think what is lacking maybe are a couple of more, I guess you'd say it kind of lacks maybe glamorous teams or big names, but hasn't really had the time yet to build up those kind of teams. And I'm kind of agnostic on the subject of promotion and relegation in the US, and I know it's a very emotional issue for some people, and very, very two partisan sides to that debate. But I think it depends a little bit on what you expect from a soccer league, what you expect from a soccer club. Do you think the whole point of building up a league is in order to make a US national team good enough to win the World Cup? In an ideal world, maybe. For me, the important thing about having a soccer team in my town is I have a soccer team in my town. I've got a team to go and watch, to go and support. I've got a community of people I can see, I can talk about with. We have common ground, and it adds to the identity of the town or the city that I live in. And whether they win or not, I think if you're following a sports team broadly, you have to be able to cope with the idea of failure as well as the idea of success. So, I am quite in favor of the collectivist idea of sport. The participation and the social role is more important than glorious nights or having a player who's earning $150,000 a day or a week or however much it is that these fantastical salaries add up to nowadays.
What do you think happens now? Let's look sort of towards the future, maybe short-term and long-term, right? We kind of discussed that, some of these forces were well underway, still are. What do you think happens to this Super League, in the coming days and weeks, and the idea of it still wrangling? It sounds to me like the idea is not going to go away. Matter of fact, I think that there are a lot of people outside of Europe who kind of perhaps saw this as an inevitable internationalization of a Super League, right? Where it's not just concentrated in Europe. And there's a lot of international money still. And, again, this is against the backdrop of sports being increasingly big business. Does this idea go away? Does the fan revolt and everybody who's been reacting so violently and so quickly kind of sort of dissipate over time? or do you think that maybe we're at a point where things may need to be seriously rethought? What do you think happens?
I think that it's going to be interesting to see how quickly they come back. I don't think there's going to be a reaction. I don't think there's going to be another attempt at this for quite a long time, because the ESL is suffering severe wounds, and it's going to take those a long time to heal, because every time they come back now, everybody's going to remember this astonishing, groundbreaking week in soccer, and they're going to have to really rethink their ideas before they come up with something that's not going to meet with the same rebuttal that they have suffered in the last 8 days. Will they learn anything? So if the ESL comes back, are they going to come back with a plan that takes into account the essence of the protests? That is, for example, will they come back with a league that says, okay, we thought about this whole no relegation thing, and we've decided, okay, we're going to maybe introduce 1 or 2 relegation spots for all the teams, not just the second-class teams. Will it take into account UEFA, the national leagues? Will it address the player concerns about too many games? Will it contain a solidarity element that would place the league in an international structure? The Super League people complained last week that nobody picked up on their preferred solidarity payment that they claimed was within their whole package, but they presented the whole thing so badly that nobody even got to see that before the whole idea was thrown out.
Well, they even used COVID as an excuse for a couple of sentences too.
Yeah. So if they come back with that kind of attitude, then you would have to presume there's a chance we'll get a hearing. I think the more likely thing is that they will come back and try to bully it through. They will try to find a push. They'll come back with so much financial backing, and probably with such a team of expensive lawyers. I think you look at the attitude of Perez at Real Madrid and Agnelli at Juventus. These are not guys who are used to having their ideas turned down. You could tell that they were absolutely astonished at the reaction last week. So they probably are not kind of introspective people to go away and seriously think about why this went wrong. I think they're more likely to come back and try and push it through by sheer financial force. I hope I'm wrong about that. I think what we really need now, is really for clubs and administrations all to sit down and have and with fans, with media, with any experts they can summon, from people from academia, and sit down and really look at the game as a whole and say, how can we make the future work? How can we take into account the investors and take into account the fans? How can we take into account the players and their demands and their needs, and where that all fits into the entire game, all the way down to the 6-year-old kicking in his local club his or her local club for the first time. And if we don't do that, then there is no. For me, there is no other way forward right now. The way things are standing. Of course, people forget quickly. The Champions League starts up again. All of a sudden, the media are just talking about, Ronaldo and Messi and how brilliant everything is and what great players they are. And we're going to lose sight of the discussion. But I think the fans have had such a shock at seeing what can happen. People have been really shaken out of their complacency. That my hope is that there will be a thorough and long-term change in the dialogue about the way we run sport. The idea of how much is it part of an entertainment industry? How much is sport important part of people's lives? That contributes to their physical health, their mental health, and to the health of a whole community.
Do we see possibly nationalism perhaps rising again? And I don't mean that sort of in a negative political context, but it's certainly also against that backdrop too, certainly over the last number of years politically around the world. But I'm struck by just how quick and visceral, although I know it's been under the surface for some time, say in the Premier League, right? Stan Kroenke out, right? The Glazers, right? Never sort of fully embraced, shall we say, in the Man United side of things. Even the Abramoviches and all these other sort of foreign, but especially the American owners, the John Henrys of the world, who have this dramatic mea culpa, right? Like, again, you couldn't have seen this, right? Well, no, but you came out of Boston and owned the Boston Red Sox baseball franchise, right? And the dalliance in soccer, right? It's a little different when you're starting to meddle with all those things that you just described, right? You're this outsider, cash in hand, right? Is kind of playing around with our legacies here. And that's, there's a line, I guess, that gets crossed, and it sounds like this one is it. I guess the question in there is, do you see some reactive recoiling, shall we say, from current owners, maybe even giving in to or getting out of their investments because of this kind of thing? Do they see a wall here, or do they just see the wall need to be broken down for the future?
I don't think soccer fans object to anybody's nationality as long as they understand the game and understand what they're getting into when they buy, for example, a Premier League soccer club. Obviously, the Kroenkes and the Glazers are just woefully underinformed about what soccer means to people in a country like the UK. And the fact that they're American is really neither here nor there, but other than the fact that the sporting culture in America, as we've been discussing this past hour, is something completely different compared with Europe, where investors invest in sports clubs because they're businessmen. So I don't think it's. I mean, yeah, people talk about the American owners. I think it's just more of a reference handle rather than any kind of insidious nationalistic element in there that are overplaying the idea that this is a foreign thing infecting our sport. I mean, there have been just as many, badly run clubs with really bad British businessmen, certainly lower down the football league, and the idea that you have no idea about how to run a football club just because you're American is completely untrue. It's the same for lots and lots of people with a business background trying to apply that business background to a completely rogue identity. This is a soccer club you're talking about. It's not a business, and no matter how much you want it to be a business and how much you bring in gurus and marketing people and branders, and you change the badge and the color and the strip and the club song, all you're doing is undermining that identity, and you don't. Unless you understand why there's resistance to that, then you're probably investing your money in the wrong place. You should really be buying a ball bearing factory or a branch of Staples or something.
Yeah, that's especially interesting, and I guess sort of I'll wrap up with this one. I see another model here that's sort of been been pursued over the last number of years as sort of the multinational model, right? So a Man City, being the major investor with the Yankees of NYCFC in Major League Soccer, right? They have a franchise, if you will, in the Australian League, right? Red Bull's got a couple of teams, between in Europe as well as the Red Bulls in Major League Soccer. I wonder if that is a good or a bad model in of itself. I just know as an American soccer fan, long suffering, mind you, when I see NYCFC, I revile against and revolt against them because I hate everything that stands for, right? Which is simply, if you will, a B team, a shadow or a feeder, if you will, supposedly, I guess, to the main franchise in Man City. It feels like you're just kind of using MLS as a way station for an international brand. Or perhaps I'm being naive that maybe that is going to be the model. I mean, in the U.S., we see many club teams, especially from the UK, but also from Spain and others setting up domestic camps in the United States, right? Looking as a feeder system, right? Taking minority or even majority ownership stakes in club teams, et cetera. Maybe it's inevitable that is a model, or perhaps the model, where one makes an investment in a multi-team, multi-country kind of environment. Maybe that's just another version of the same ills that we've kind of been hinting at here.
Yeah, possibly. It depends a lot on how the clubs go about it. I mean, if you build up a structure and you build training facilities and you offer possibilities to a wide variety of youth teams and to women teams as well, then I think you can make a positive impact in that particular community. It's not necessarily crucial where the parent club is, as long as the parent club comes with benevolent motives, as well as the desire to nurture young players and find stars before somebody else gets their hands on them. So I don't see that as the ultimate evil in sports right now, because it depends a lot where that money is coming from. In the case you cite Manchester City, we know that money is coming from the Gulf region, backed by a less than democratic government. And if you're a Manchester City fan and you can square that away and say, I don't mind, I'm still going to support my team, whatever, then that's your decision. Your view of it, I can also more than understand when you kind of revolted by the whole idea of NYCFC, which is a little bit, the whole thing is a little bit fake.
All right, time to promote, Ian. We obviously want to call out your great book that we talked about in an earlier episode about the North American Soccer League. What's been the response to that book over the last couple of years, and what other things have you done since, as well as perhaps in the hopper for the future?
Well, rock and roll soccer has been a bit of a slow burner. I still get a lot of emails about it and a lot of requests to talk about it. I think it flew under the radar in the UK and in the US when it was published in 2016. It didn't get that much attention from the sports press in America. But I had a lot of nice feedback about it from former players, former fans of the NASL, a lot of reviews on the Goodreads website. So it's been at the time I was a little worried about it because there's so many soccer books out there and they come and go and they disappear very quickly. So it's still available. It won't cost you much money. And I think it's a very important book in terms of tracking what has happened in international soccer since the 1970s. And my selling point of it was the NASL was, unwittingly or not, the inspiration for the English Premier League and the European Champions League in many ways. And the crash and burn story is maybe also an ongoing lesson for how we run sports leagues, teams, and franchises. After that,
by the way, it's our episode number 49. So for those who have not listened to the episode, please, by all means, find that either on our website or in your podcast feed. And I'm sorry, other stuff going on too?
Yeah, and then in 2000, a couple of years ago, I published a book called The Quiet Fan, which has also largely flown under the radar. Was published by a UK publisher called Unbound, and it was kind of a memoir and kind of a love letter to soccer, and it was trying to explain why soccer is important to me. And the book, I think, was trying to do a number of different things, which made it kind of hard for people to get a grasp on it and made it hard for me to explain why people ought to read it. So it was missing that elevator cell. If you were to ask me now, why did you write that book and why do you think anybody should read it, I would say it's entertaining, kind of, I hope, funny, but it also offers up an alternative view of watching sport. And my whole shtick, I guess you'd call it, in the book was calling out the idea that we watch games because of the results. I wanted to create a kind of diary of my life, focusing on 12 particular games with 12 particular themes of life, and how these games brought back memories of particular times in my life. So it was seeing sport as a kind of marker of our times, of our existence, rather than something that's important in itself. Because sport, in a way, is kind of meaningless if you take it by itself. But if you put it in its social context, if you put it in the context of where was I the time that, what was I doing the day Germany won the 2014 World Cup? What was I doing the day Lincoln City got promoted in 1976 or whatever? There's random examples. It was tempting to look at myself as a fan for reasons other than just jumping up and down and cheering. I felt that ever since the 1970s and 80s, fans were either maligned as hooligans or as these sort of obsessive, passionate, a word which I really dislike, obsessive, passionate fanatics who would do all and everything and give all and everything just to follow their team. I think that's kind of a media construct. And it doesn't really, a marketing construct as well, it doesn't really at all correspond to my own experience of following soccer and all the other fans I know. There are very few people I know who are like either one of those stereotypes. And the way we follow sport is a kind of, it's a Saturday thing. It's what you do on Saturday or on Wednesday night or whatever. It's a fantastic diversion. And it kind of like the pandemic, when games were suddenly suspended a year ago for 2 months, it kind of really threw that into light. The whole one of the things I was trying to say was, as long as soccer's going on, you feel like the world is broadly okay, because no matter what's happening in your personal life or in political scene or whatever, come Saturday, the teams are out on the field. And then all of a sudden, we had this international medical emergency where the teams weren't out on the field. And that was kind of distressing in many ways. And to have the fans still absent from most of our stadiums it continues to contribute to that distress in a way. It's still making these very unique and sad times.
All right. That is clearly not the last time we're going to be talking about this topic for sure, either specifically about the Super League or what used to be the Super League, soccer generally, and the money that's creeping ever so more deeply into the sport and what might come from it on both sides of the Atlantic. Certainly sports globally, for sure. All these themes we've talked about on previous episodes are just, everything old is new again. And this particular episode is just the latest in a long series of trials and travails of the foibles of certain aspects of professional sports. That's what we focus here on this show, and we will continue to do it until we find it not interesting, and that may be for a long time to come, for sure. All right, let's see. Ian Plenderleith's writings can be found on a whole host of different publications, but the one I want to call your attention to is our pals at Soccer America, now celebrating its 50th anniversary. Happy birthday to Soccer America, the chronicler extraordinaire of the beautiful game here in the United States, has been for decades now. And you can check them out at socceramerica.com. You can sign up and get a few free articles to get a taste of what you've been missing, and hopefully subscribe, for God's sakes, and enjoy all the fine writings. And we want to say a great thanks to Mike Watala and Paul Kennedy for getting us reconnected to Ian this week, as well as, of course, their longtime support of the show, their original introduction to our pal Paul Gardner, who we hope can come back on the show again to reminisce with us on some more stuff on the NASL, etc. And let's see, Ian's book, as we highlighted in episode number 49. If you never listened to that one, go back and find it and listen to that too. That's a wonderful conversation and a lot of fun. The book is called Rock and Roll Soccer, The Short Life and Fast Times of the North American Soccer League. It's a hoot. You will enjoy it. And it is now out in both paperback and hardcover editions. And the best place that we would recommend you considering and actually executing a purchase for said book, as well as all the other books, for God's sakes, is from our website, goodseatsstillavailable.com. Just search up this episode number 213 with Ian Plenderleith, or if you're inclined, episode number 49 featuring Ian Plenderleith. Either way, you will find a convenient link to this book. And when you do so and you purchase it that way, not only will you be whisked away to Amazon, which is probably the fastest and least expensive manner by which to secure a copy of this book on the planet, it's also a way to share with us a few nickels and dimes, and I literally mean nickels and dimes, of referral love for us to, put into our coffers, and certainly not to benefit and wine and dine, but to put into the show, to pay the proverbial lights and electricity and server space and all kinds of stuff. The fees for our editor, yes, our good friend Jerry Payne. Yeah, he doesn't come cheap, Jerry Payne Audio Excellence. He's the guy who puts all of our pieces together each and every week. He's been doing it for 4+ years now, and it's not for free. He does it. So when you're buying your books and your stuff, go through our website. Why don't you and help us out, will you? Thanks. Let's see. While you're on the website at goodseatsstillavailable.com, you can find all of our old episodes. They're all there for you to stream and download and do whatever you want. And by the way, wherever you listen, wherever podcatcher or system that you listen to, if there's a place to rate and review the show, please, by all means, do so. And hopefully you'll be favorably inclined, maybe a 5-star rating and some couple of good words and stuff. We appreciate that to no end. And that helps other people find the show. So please do that. It's a good thing. And if you're not buying stuff from us, hey, it's the least you can do for us. We appreciate that. Our social media feed, sure. Follow us on Facebook. There's a page devoted to us there. Follow us on Instagram at Good Seats Still Available. Follow us on Twitter. We're at Good Seats Still. Let's see. You can send us email at hello@goodseatsstillavailable.com. And you can also subscribe to our little email weekly newsletter. There's a link to that somewhere on the website too. All right. Thank you very much for listening. We appreciate it to no end. Take care, everybody. We'll see you next week. Get your shots and take care.